Hello, and welcome to Soothing Pod Sleep Stories. My name is Laura, and tonight I will be your guide as we explore the famous love story of Anna Karenina. We'll travel with her to Italy as she spends 3 long months in a beautiful palazzo alongside her lover, Count Vronsky, away from the prying eyes of the society they have left behind. We will join them as they walk along riversides, spend long nights painting, and have deep conversations by each other's side. But before we begin, let us take a moment to unwind and find comfort in the space that we are in, here and now. Allow yourself to sink into the mattress underneath you. There are no obligations for you at this moment. Nothing to do except simply be. Here you can trust your body to do what it is meant to do. Imagine the air around you aglow with a warm orange light. It is ethereal, something magical and comforting. It sparkles even in the darkness of your room, crackling and swaying like the toasty flames of a fire. As you breathe in, imagine that warm light filling your lungs. As you breathe in more and more, feel as that warmth spreads from your chest, down your arms, and into the ends of your fingers and toes. As you exhale, picture that breath leaving your lungs and sailing up, 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 up into the air around your bed. The warmth that your breath brought you has also given you the gift of relaxation. You can still feel it spreading through your body, melting away the tension of your tight muscles, and leaving you to sink deeper and deeper into your soft mattress. With every breath you take, feel yourself growing more and more comfortable, your eyes growing heavier and heavier. Your mind is slowly giving your body permission to sleep, permission to let go in this moment and simply be, without worrying about anything beyond this. It is a beautiful freedom that we can find by simply paying attention to those deep breaths and how they make our bodies feel. Now that you've taken a few breaths in, try and picture that glowing orange light inside you. Can you feel it sparkling on the ends of your fingertips? Can you feel it swaying over your chest and arms, relieving any tension there until you feel as light as a feather? You carry this warmth and comfort with you everywhere that you go. And tonight, if you find your mind drifting from the story that we are going to explore together, try and remember that you can always return to the breathing to relax and ground you. Now that we have taken the time to unwind and find comfort in the space that we are in here and now, let us begin our story. The journey from Russia to Italy was not a short one, but Anna and Vronsky did not mind. Their stagecoach rumbled over the roads out in the countryside. They weren't sure what country they were in at the moment, but they knew it was beautiful. Anna's gaze drifted out the window to the passing trees and mountains. The sky was a blanket of grey today, but that seemed to only make the scenery more magnificent. The blue mountain peaks rose high into the sky, disappearing behind the haze in a way that made Anna think of fairy tales and distant lands. And truly, it made sense for her mind to be there, because at the moment, she was in a fairy tale in a distant land. She looked at Vronsky across from her. His hair fell in perfect golden curls above his crystal blue eyes. He seemed to have a permanent smile etched on his face since they had left Russia behind. It was a decision they had toyed with for quite some time, one that left ripples of drama behind in their social circles. But at this moment, neither of them cared. They were running away together, leaving life as they knew it back in Russia, so they could live the life they had been dreaming of for months now, by each other's side. Anna's hand drifted across the carriage, clasping around Vronsky's. She swore she could feel his pulse in his touch, could feel the steady, gentle uptick as they held one another, even this small amount. It wasn't just love between them. No, both of them had been in love before. This was something stronger, something that neither of them could deny. It was a power they held over one another, a feeling unlike any they had ever experienced before. They were infatuated. When they looked into each other's eyes, nothing else in the world mattered. It was as though their hearts were beating in unison with one another. Soon, it started to rain. They had a few hours to go before they were to reach their new home in Italy. But neither of them minded. Anna listened to the pitter-patter, 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 pitter-patter of the cool rain as it danced against the roof. She listened to the rhythm of the tire as it rumbled, 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 carrying them over every rock, every branch, everything in their path, onto their long-awaited destination. The rhythm of the world around her made Anna rather sleepy. She already felt as though she was in a dream, but the sweet, earthy aroma of the rain-soaked forest around them made her feel even more so. She found herself closing her eyes. Vronsky moved over to her side, stroking her long hair with his forever gentle touch. He urged her to sleep until they arrived in Italy, to sleep until they arrived in their new home. He would hold her until then. In her half-awake state, Anna found herself smiling. She had given up everything she had ever known, her friends, her family, her home back in Russia. She had abandoned it all and sullied her reputation to live her life with this man. And in that moment, more than ever, she knew she had made the right choice. With her eyes closed and the love of her life's arms wrapped around her, Anna began to drift off, inching closer and closer to sleep. The sound of Vronsky planting a gentle kiss on her forehead was the last thing she heard before she slipped into her dreams. When Anna awakened, the landscape around her was entirely different. The sleepy countryside had transformed into a lively city, and though the rain was still coming down in a steady stream, that did not stop the people of this city from moving. People scurried under alcoves, taking time to stop and chat with one another. Fragrant steam wafted out of bakeries and cafes as they rolled past them, filling the stagecoach with the delicious smell of baked bread, pasta, and baked desserts. The streets seemed to be flourishing with artists of all kinds. Passing by one of the windows, Anna couldn't help but notice a sculptor working on a large piece. Even in the darkness of this dreary weather, his sculpture seemed to sparkle and shine in the light. She could smell the fresh paint as painters worked on their next masterpiece. She could hear the scribble of a quill as poets worked on their next poem. It was a city alive in the dreamiest way imaginable, and Anna was soaking in every moment of it. Any anxiety she had about moving to the city seemed to have melted away the instant she looked at Vronsky and noticed that he was admiring the city the same way that she was. Truly, they were starting their lives anew, and they had chosen to start them in a city that was more breathtaking than they ever could have imagined. When they arrived at their palazzo, Anna had to stop to catch her breath. It was so different from the castles back home, so connected to the city around it, yet so extravagant in the same breath. The courtyard was lined with flowers of all colours, shapes, and sizes. A fountain in the middle of flowers bubbled steadily, the rain leaving circles on its mellow surface. As they stepped onto the tiles, Anna breathed in the scent of the rain-drenched flowers. It was so magical, so otherworldly, that she felt as though tears would fill her eyes at any moment. Vronsky stood beside her, holding an umbrella over her head with the utmost care. He smiled at her, a smile that made her heart flutter for an instant. There was always such a youthful glow in his eyes, a promise that the future would be exciting, would be worth sticking around to see. And at this moment, it was even more so. It was infectious, contagious. His joy seemed to leap into the air and touch every part of her soul, encouraging her to feel the exact same. She took his hand with a smile on her face and led him through the winding courtyard, pausing only to smell the flowers on occasion. When they reached the front door, Vronsky wrapped his hand around hers on the door handle. This was the home they were to share together, the place where their lives were going to truly begin. And as they opened the door together, hands intertwined, Anna truly realized how special that was. The home was one of beauty. It was wide open, vastly different from the castles they had left behind, which were cluttered with furniture and statues and artwork. This home was for them to fill with any and everything their hearts desired. They wandered from room to room, taking in each of them. It seemed that by the minute, the realization of the situation that they were in washed over them more and more. And with that, their smiles grew. After they got their things out of the stagecoach and settled into the house, it was time for them to step out into their new town for the first time. They didn't know anyone here yet, but that was fine by them. For now, they were content just being with one another. It was more than enough. Anna put on one of her favourite dresses, a powder blue gown with cream trim. Vronsky found himself gazing at her in the doorway in his dreamy state, his eyes tracing over her in awe. He had yet to tire of how beautiful Anna was, of her grace, of the breathtaking way she carried herself and her thoughts through the world. And under his gaze, Anna felt more beautiful than she ever had before. The two stepped out into the rain-soaked streets and began their search for dinner together. By now, the glossy streets were aglow with the light of oil lamps overhead, yet the people were moving just as they had been hours before. Everyone around them was smiling and laughing as they headed off to dinner with one another. There was a sense of community, a feeling that Anna and Vronsky hadn't witnessed without anger in quite some time. They walked by cafes and restaurants, breathing in the fragrant aromas of each and every one. There were shops selling coffee, places selling pastries, ostentatious restaurants serving up steak and fish. But at the end of the street, nestled alongside a river, there was a small restaurant that appeared as though it was often overlooked. Anna and Vronsky travelled down the riverside path and entered the small restaurant. It had been quite some time since they'd dined on anything except for the extravagant meals prepared for them at their estates. This was an opportunity for something different, something that would welcome them into this entirely new life. They sat down at a small wooden table that was illuminated by a flickering candle. The meal had already been decided for them, which they welcomed. They sat in the glow of that candle, gazing deeply at each other for quite some time. They spoke of their love for one another. They spoke of the fact that they had something so strong, so true and real, that they had to escape with one another. For the first time in her whole life, Anna felt as though she was free. She found that freedom with Vronsky. She found a joy that she had yet to find anywhere else in life. He made her feel wise and childish at the same time. He lit the hearth inside of her that had been left smouldering for quite some time. They were so enthralled with one another that they didn't even notice the first course arrive. It was a brilliant spread of olives, cheeses, and quiches. Each bite was more delectable than the last, and it still paled in comparison to the rest of the meal. They dined on bruschetta, marinated vegetables, fish, and then pasta. It was a lemon pasta, more delicious than anything they had ever had before. The shared first experience brought them even closer together. For so long, they had been forced to take their meals apart. And when they were together, there was a distance between them and societal rules that had to be strictly obeyed. Here they could be themselves. They could look at each other and talk to each other without fear of being heard, of being judged. They could sink into their relationship in a way that they had never been able to before. When the meal was finished, they were left with coffee, an Italian staple. They sipped the rich, delectable coffee until there wasn't a single drop left. The invigorating taste prepared them to head outside into the rain once more, though they knew their bed was waiting for them on the other side of town. They walked through the storm holding hands. They listened to the rhythm of the rain as it danced across the cobblestone and the rooftops. They listened to the sound of laughter echoing through the streets. They listened to the pure joy of strangers as they walked past their conversations. This was a world they were more than pleased to be in. When they finally arrived back at their new home, Vronsky lit a candle as Anna prepared herself for bed. She crawled in bed alongside him, savouring the softness of the sheets around her body. It had been a long day of travel, a long day of experiencing new things, of becoming the people they felt they were always meant to be. And yet, they didn't fall asleep quite yet. They lay in each other's arms. Anna laid her head on Vronsky's chest, listening to the beat, 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 beat of his heart. It was the sweetest sound she had ever heard. Her eyes grew heavier and heavier and heavier and heavier as she listened to it beat, 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 until finally she found herself drifting off, putting a brilliant end to one of the most beautiful days she had ever had. When Vronsky awakened in the morning, he was surprised that Anna wasn't right by his side. He got out of bed and stretched, soaking in the feeling of this brand new day. He crossed over to the window and looked out on a city that seemed entirely different than it had the night before. It was a city of colour, a vibrant, lively city with orange and cream buildings, with wrought iron, with bright green ivy and trees. He could feel inspiration flowing through him as he gazed out on the streets. He walked downstairs, eager to speak to Anna about how the city looked without the haze of rainfall. He was delighted to find Anna setting breakfast on the table with a smile on her face. Back home, Anna never cooked. This was reserved for the cooks at the estate. She has always longed to make a meal by herself, to create something in the kitchen and experiment away from the prying eyes of the other society women. She was proud of herself, and Vronsky was proud of her. The two took the meal out into the sunshine, where they breakfasted among the flowers. Vronsky found himself looking at Anna in an entirely new way. Perhaps it was because he had grown closer to her over the journey. Perhaps the change of scenery had made him see even more in her. Or perhaps it was just the way the high, bright Italian sun illuminated her features. He interwove his fingers with Anna's and proposed an idea. He wanted to paint her. Something to commemorate this move they had made together. Something that could allow her to see how beautiful she was through his eyes. Anna smiled at Vronsky, her heart fluttering in her chest. No one had ever done such a thing for her. No one had even proposed such a thing. There was such joy in his eyes at the mention, such joy that she knew she wanted nothing more than to agree. A few hours later, Vronsky had the supplies gathered to paint her. They sat in that courtyard surrounded by fragrant flowers, listening to the comforting conversations of neighbours as they passed by on the busy street. And though there were people just beyond them, they felt as though they were in their own little world. Vronsky was invested, taking time to carefully select each colour, time to truly take in the contours of her face, the sparkle of her eyes, the way her hair glistened in the sun. Anna sat still as he worked. She didn't mind, because she was watching the most incredible thing unfold before her very eyes. Vronsky was becoming an artist, and she, his muse. Several hours passed like this. They made the art in silence together, not wanting for conversation, nor needing it. There was so much intimacy in the moment that words would have spoiled it. Finally, when Vronsky became tired, it was time for a break. By then, the sun had made its way across the sky. The city was painted in the breathtaking golden light of the slowly setting sun. There was magic in the air now, and they could feel it in their steps. Vronsky took Anna by the hand and led her down through the cobblestone streets. They passed by a sculptor working on an impressive sculpture in a courtyard, wielding his chisel as though it was nothing more than a common pen. They passed by another artist creating a landscape painting. It was a mosaic of oranges, reds, yellows, and browns. A painting that would have once reminded them of autumn, but now reminded them of the sun setting on the Riviera here. They walked alongside the river, their fingers tightly intertwined. They admired the way the sun sparkled on the river, illuminating the rocks far below. For quite some time, walks in the garden were the only time they could escape from the society around them. They had always found refuge on their long walks. They could breathe with nature and talk freely with one another, admitting their feelings, their hopes, their dreams. And though they were totally free now, the riverside had the same effect. They meandered alongside it for quite some time, until they came to a small hill. Atop the hill was a large ancient oak tree. Its branches seemed to be reaching for the sun. Its leaves seemed to be more vibrant green than any of the trees they had seen in Russia or here. They felt drawn to it. They both sat under the shade the beautiful tree provided. Around them, The sweet emerald grass swayed in the summer breeze. They could smell the wild flowers growing nearby, their scent as sweet as honey. And from across the river, they could smell the aroma of freshly baked bread, of bubbling coffee, of rising cakes. The smells alone made them want to sink down into the grass and stay there. But there was more than that. They felt like they had found their own slice of heaven here. Below them, at the edge of a river, a mum led her baby ducks into the water. They plopped in, one after the other, each one more adorable and clumsy than the last. Anna and Vronsky giggled as they watched them try and make their way in the world. Birds swooped overhead, nestling in the oak tree above them. They sang their song into the universe, though it felt like a private concert just for Anna and Vronsky. Anna lay in Vronsky's arms. He stroked her hair gently as they whispered to one another about the future. They had their whole lives ahead of them, and finally, they would be able to spend that time together. It felt as though the universe had given them the most precious gift that anyone had ever had. They listened to the river as it laced through the city centre, travelling off into the countryside that they had been travelling through just yesterday. It struck Anna for a moment how far they were from home, and how little they knew about where they were. But Vronsky gave her a reassuring smile. He swiped the hair away from her eyes and leaned in closer, making sure his words were both heard and felt deeply. He told Anna that they were indeed far from where they grew up. They had given up everything they knew. They had severed connections, given up on the future they had grown up thinking they would have, and gone against everyone around them. But now, they are home. Wherever life led them, as long as Vronsky was by Anna's side, he would be at home. They could be in the frozen land of the Arctic, in the distant mountains of China, in the countryside of Italy, and he would still be home as long as he was with her. Anna felt tears welling in her eyes. Vronsky wiped them away, one after another, once again reminding Anna why she had made this decision. In her bones, she knew that no one else had a love like this. No one was understood the way that she was understood, and she was so immensely grateful for that. Soon, the sun was sinking down over the horizon. The sky overhead was a watercolour mosaic. It was as if the heavens were giving a show for the happy couple. A show playing out in swirling oranges, yellows, reds and pinks, as the sun danced further and further and further away from them. They sat under the tree for quite some time, watching those colours reflect in the water, watching as the duck and her ducklings curled up with one another for the night. Then, they began their journey back to their home. They passed by the artists, wrapping up for the night. They passed by the cafes and restaurants, overflowing with happy people who were now their neighbours. All the while, they felt incredibly grateful. Finally, they were home. After realising they hadn't eaten all day, the two dined on the only thing in their kitchen, some leftover bread. It was a far cry from the food they were used to, but as they ate it beside each other, they couldn't help but smile. This was all they had ever wanted. They headed up the staircase. Vronsky lit some candles as Anna prepared herself for bed. When she crawled into the sheets beside him, she pulled out a book of poems that the two had often visited in their long walks in the garden, what seemed like a lifetime ago. Anna read the poems aloud in a soft, sleepy tone. The words seemed to roll off her tongue easier than ever now, dancing through the air like a melody. Vronsky closed his eyes as his darling read to him. The words were much sweeter coming from her lips than they ever were on the page. He could have listened to her read for hours, and if he could keep his eyes from closing, he certainly would have. Anna played with his curls as she read to him. On occasion, she'd allow herself to look away from the words to simply take him in. The way his eyelashes hung heavy over his eyes, the way his cheeks were tinged with a light pink from the kiss of the sun earlier that day, the way he smiled involuntarily when she said certain words in the poem. He was the kind of man she had always dreamt of being with. Soon, she reached the end of the book, and Vronsky was fast asleep, his head canted on her shoulder. She smiled, daring not to move. She admired him for quite some time, watching the rise and fall, rise and fall, rise and fall, rise and fall of his chest. She watched as he twitched gently in his sleep and found herself wondering what it was exactly he was dreaming about. Finally, she set the book down and blew out the candle, being careful not to wake him up. Regardless of her effort, some part of him stirred, because he gently reached out and drew her nearer, cradling her against his muscular chest. She smiled in his arms, knowing she was safe, knowing she had made the right decision to come here. She breathed in and out, in and out, in and out, in and out, in unison with him. Her breathing slowed as her eyes grew heavier and heavier. And before long, she was drifting off to sleep by his side. I hope you have enjoyed this story, and it has brought you a night of restful, relaxing sleep. Please join me again tomorrow night for another sleep story. Until then, sweet dreams.